Okay, I see many people who stayed until this strange opening. No, it's open. No, it's not. It's closing. It's not opening. For me, it's opening because I just arrived for the closing. So thank you for taking the time. It's a rare pleasure for me to talk to people with completely different expertise than myself. I have a legal background, and for last 10 years, I've been working with technology because it's impossible not to work with it if you deal with human rights at the intersection of IT world and human world. This is where, in my opinion, the most interesting and challenging things happen. So I do have many colleagues and collaborators who know what's behind the screen. But I'm not an engineer, I'm not a developer, so please have tolerance for my ignorance if I show it during this short keynote. I'm hoping to have discussion with you about questions or issues that you are bringing to this room, so please be prepared for the interactive part. I think I won't speak long, maybe 20 minutes, but let's see how it goes. Organizers very kindly asked me to close bringing into this room what we lawyers, the issues lawyers see as most challenging or pertinent regarding how to design technology in the times of GDPR. Is GDPR something that rings a bell in this room? Have you heard this acronym before? Great. Okay. Okay. Oh, that's a relief. It's not such a big leap then. I will. I promise. I will talk about GDPR. But before this, I want to start with the base, with explaining why I'm here, why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I think that data matters. It might be outrageous for you to even think that data wouldn't matter, that data wouldn't be important. I agree. I think data is extremely important. But not so many people outside of this room, I think, fully realize the power hidden in data and the power over humans that can be used if you have enough data. So the mission of Panopticon Foundation, keeping it very short, is actually to reveal that, to make people outside of rooms like this one is full of experts and practitioners aware of the real stakes involved in data collection, data sharing, data analysis, and everything that makes your life and also my life, but slightly on a different side as an external perspective of somebody who's trying to change the balance from the situation where users are completely in the dark, completely unaware of these processes, naive to the extent that it becomes dangerous for them, to the situation where they are more in control. I wouldn't be surprised if you sitting here actually believed that you are in control. You don't need people like me to help you because you probably feel that you know the stuff well enough to control how the data flows, the applications, the software that you use as users works. But even if you do, I'm not here to question your competence, just to tell you that outside of this room, the world looks very different. And people using those technologies, they are really not in control. My way of explaining this, recently developed infographic is something like this, is my understanding of the difference between data that users consciously choose to share, and the real online profile that they generate. So our way of illustrating this is this circle where only the very small middle part of this circle is built with data that people actively share. Things like searches, things like likes, or even ignoring the content could be seen as conscious activity, although not for all. Things like photos we upload, invitations we accept, events we attend on Facebook and similar apps, messages we send. This is the content that we can probably control, although I know many people myself, and they are experts in other fields, who don't really think twice before doing this. So I wouldn't actually give them full credit for even controlling this middle part. And that's the beginning of the story, right? That's the beginning, that's the tip of the iceberg. that for people who create technology, who make money on technology, it's only the starting point, probably not the most interesting one, right? It gets much more interesting the further we get in this picture. The second layer, oh, sorry, I took the wrong. So, right, we already spoke about things we share, probably consciously, but the second layer, I think, gets far more interesting and far more troubling for people like me, because here you see a lot of behavioral data, a lot of behavioral observation that is obviously based on metadata coming from devices and on the observation of how the user behaves. So to some extent, I know users as well, expert users, who try to control this layer, who say, I actually double check whether the photo I uploaded had metadata available to the app, or I'm really conscious about how my location could be tracked with Wi-Fi and other proxies, and I'm switching them off in advance. I'm really conscious of, say, the movements I do when I carry a phone, or I don't carry a phone if I don't want my movements to be tracked. But that takes a lot of effort, and I would say it becomes almost impossible or almost a nuisance, disturbing your life if you try to control that layer. And of course, I don't have to teach you this. I'm sure you know it better than me, that this kind of traces, digital traces, are extremely valuable for those who create technology or make money on technology. In my bubble, at some point, Edward Snowden was a very inspirational speaker on these issues, and it was Snowden who said that metadata don't lie. That's why they are so valuable for the intelligence. You can lie in the message you send, you can adopt many codes, but your metadata are likely to tell the truth. So that layer is extremely important and extremely difficult for average users to control. And finally, there is something I call third layer, which is composed of interpretations, not of something I shared, not of something that somebody observed about me on the basis of how I use application or software, but based on interpretation of all this coming from algorithmic data analysis. Again, in my legal tech bubble, algorithms still are the buzzword, I think, current buzzword of every year since, I think, 3 years ago, and nobody speaks about anything else than algorithms and AI, because there's so much excitement around this, so much belief that the use of data analytics and it will change business. The way we do business will change. The way we use software will change. The way we run a state and we do politics. So I would say there is over belief regarding this side of the technology, creating many dangers. But that's another story, maybe for later. The point here is that because so many companies and so many state organizations experiment with AI and algorithms, predictions and interpretations of human behavior are everywhere. They are used for advertising, they are used for small decisions, and they are used for big decisions like credit scoring, like recruitment to work, like enrollment to schools, like assessment whether somebody is dangerous from state or intelligence perspective. So it is everywhere. And these predictions, this third layer of predictions, is really something that user has almost zero awareness. I don't know how many of you tried to check your marketing profile with Google or Facebook, any of these dominating companies that actually show you your marketing profiles. Have you ever looked at this? Some of you tried. Okay, I tried too, and I was extremely disappointed because even without your expertise, with my research, I know that they have much more on me. They reveal from ProPublica, another organization, very interesting one based in New York. From their research on Facebook, we know that Facebook has, well, not couple, it's tens of thousands of marketing categories. Even Facebook itself announced recently they deleted, I think, a couple of thousand of marketing categories because they believe they might be discriminatory. And they show us stupid things like, oh, you might like this kind of movies, or you might like cats. Well, really, I mean, this is not the really sexy, interesting thing that advertisers buy from them. So the real interpretations, the real inferences made on the basis of our data are not visible to users. Nobody is sharing them. If you go to your bank and ask about your risk profile, maybe they will give you a final score, as they gave me when I asked, but nothing more than that, because they perceive this as secret. So there are very many areas of life, not even mentioning police, predictive policing, and state policy, where most of the things are kept secret, where we have no control over this. And these kind of interpretations, they really affect people's life. So how it happens that we lose control, or how it happens that I say we lose control. It starts very often with data collection, with operation of stupid, I'm sorry for saying this, but that's my opinion, apps that people install without thinking twice, for fun, or because somebody encouraged them, or because it's Facebook, and since it's on Facebook, probably it's safe. Wow, really? So they install a lot of crap like this one that tries to use a microphone, tries to use access to messages, to contacts, in order to basically steal data and exploit it. And there is no way to catch this data the moment it departed from the device. So those are just examples. Another one I have from our research after GDPR entered into force. We did some research on apps, what is doing what, and we discovered very interesting things. Even like this one, it's not bank's own application. It's something that pretends to be a bank application, and it's there precisely to fetch the content of messages. What it's doing with this content, don't ask me, ask people behind this app. Probably they will never give us the reply. And this is obviously only small examples. If we look at advertising system, the way advertising operates, I'm sure you are familiar with this, being on the business side. The way we see it in Panopticon is that every moment a user goes to a website that has a real-time bidding that is connected to a real-time bidding ecosystem, there is a huge leak of personal data, because the data about this user, very often full URL revealing how this user entered this website, what was interesting for this user. For example, whether that person searched for certain medicine or certain information about mental health or sexual life or politics or whatever, that information is revealed to all the players active in the real-time bidding ecosystem, and that leak is actually, these data are leaked without any further control over who does what next with those pieces of digital dandruff, as I like to call it. So the leaks happen everywhere. These data leaks happen everywhere. But what are the consequences? You might say, okay, well, everybody knows it. My point is not everybody knows it, and trust me, because I do speak to people outside of this room as well. But also the consequences are, I think, far more troubling and far less predictable than we would like them to be. Because it's not just about the advertising, right? We know advertising exists, we know how to block it, we know how to circumvent it, maybe we even know how to protect ourselves from tracking scripts. But we know it. Mostly people don't, so they are subjected to tracking, and then they are subjected to profiling that I was showing on this circular graph, as a result of which many actors that people never met, they might not even know that these actors exist, they gain this data power, this power that I mentioned at the very beginning of my talk, the power over humans, which can be used not just in the shopping context, yes? We might think of advertising as relatively innocent. But if you think twice, if you think about other groups of people with vulnerabilities, about teenagers, about kids that start using YouTube with advertising extremely early in their lives, if you think about people who are subjected to some mental who struggle with some mental issues like depression or anxiety, or even a hypomania, even something nice might lead you through advertising to spending money on something you don't want to buy, or choosing activity that you wouldn't choose normally without this specific advertising targeting you in this specific moment of vulnerability, or the way advertising might leak information about your vulnerabilities to others if they see your device with all those ads shining and revealing what you've been searching for last night or what you are thinking about at this very moment. So that's only one level. Then comes another aspect, which is price discrimination. We know we have a lot of evidence from internet, from airlines, from bookings, from online shops selling laptops. There is a lot going in the world of price discrimination. To some extent, we might argue, yes, companies can differentiate prices towards different consumers, especially if it's based on location, like US versus Europe. But if it goes deeper, again, if it goes towards your vulnerabilities or it's based on your actual income or the urgency of what you want to buy, then it becomes more tricky. Or think about risk management. Risk management is not just about credit scoring, that we sort of accepted that it exists, even though it becomes, even in Europe, it becomes more and more data-driven, less and less related to pure financial data. So the color of your car or your habits, like walking a dog or buying groceries on certain times of the day or buying alcohol certain times of the week might in fact have influence on your credit score, which we might not like, but that's the reality, that's the data-driven reality that we live in. And the same logic, the risk management logic, spreads over many other areas, not just banking. It goes into insurance, but it also goes into recruitment, where for an average recruiting company these days, it's much cheaper, much more effective, much more reliable to look at the data profile, yes, this full circular picture of a person, rather than talk to a live human being, because who would do it if we have all the data? So this risk management thinking affects different zones of our life. And if we are unlucky to have a bad credit score or bad insurance score or bad risk score for whatever, for Uber, it might appear to be influential in completely different area of our life. And this is also already happening. Finally, the whole debate about fake news, hate the term, but that's another story, or disinformation, or targeted, maybe the best way to put it, targeted messages, not advertising, but targeted messages that influence how people think, what kind of beliefs they have, how they shape their behavior online. This is also a high stake, which is also determined by data profile. And at the end of the day, all this wealth of data can be controlled by the state, yes? There is nothing in the law, in the Polish law, in the US law, in other European laws I know, that would prevent state actors like intelligence from having access to all of this. They can have access to all of this. It's just a matter of time and just a matter of purpose and judicial control, which some countries are struggling with having it, like Poland these days. So it's better to think twice also about how we imagine data living in the second or third life that somebody else will give them. And these are the consequences, or these are the stakes that politicians and people like me, advocates, lobbyists, I perceive myself as lobbyists representing citizen interest in politics. Those are the stakes we had in mind where we started very long time ago conversation about GDPR, which I know doesn't have the best press in business world, and I'm sad about this because it's really, I wouldn't say excellent because it was a compromise, but it's really good piece of legislation that is extremely flexible and business friendly compared to what we had before. I think that many people criticize GDPR or are afraid of it are people who never had contact with data protection laws before. I had them. I worked in a big law firm before. I had banks as my clients and insurance companies as my clients. And the way we struggled with the previous data protection patchwork regime is uncomparable with the pleasure that lawyers have these days when they have one single regulation applying to everybody, even foreign companies, even companies based in China, US, Africa, never mind where, as long as they have clients in Europe. They don't have to be EU citizens. It's just enough that they are located in Europe. This regulation applies. And the deep philosophy of this regulation is really what I started with. It's bringing the balance. It's bringing the balance back where users are given more control, are encouraged to take control, and where companies are expected to give them more mechanisms to control their data. But there is nothing in GDPR, trust me, saying that you cannot use data, yes? There's nothing in GDPR saying that data shouldn't flow or you shouldn't process data, not at all. There is even, if you look at the recitals, this beginning of like a preamble to the law, it even mentions free data flow as value. So it is about balancing, and I think it strikes this balance quite well, especially that this legislation is designed on patterns from Anglo-Saxon world more than continental law. So it's more like a guide for managers than a Bible for lawyers. Therefore, for example, Polish lawyers struggle with this a lot because they are used to having a catalog, like a criminal law, catalog of what I do when something else happens, and they are looking for those cases. They are looking for prescriptions to do everything. And you will not find these prescriptions in GDPR because it's very flexible. It's based on principles, and it requires logical thinking, courage, and imagination from lawyers, which is a tricky thing to do. So probably that's why we have so many ridiculous interpretations of it. Excuse me. So if there was one thing that you would need to know from this whole regulation, which is 100 articles long, is this one, is privacy by design and privacy by default. It's a principle, but also two specific provisions of GDPR that actually set a base or set the fundament for those who design technology, for those who are on implementation side, so to say. I give you here legal text of it if you are curious to look at it, but you don't have to read it. I'm also happy to explain the essence of it. So the essence of it, it's quite intuitive. It's too late to think about privacy after something has been designed. If you design something without thinking about certain value, whether usability or security or privacy, it won't be there, right? You know it. Lawyers didn't know it, so therefore they need this kind of provision. But for an engineer or developer, it goes without saying. So now it's also in the law that says you have to think the controller. So not the engineer, not the developer, but the person or the entity responsible for a service, very often your boss or board or executive director, somebody who takes decisions is responsible for, in a way, listening to you and saying, hey, how do we design it so it's privacy friendly? If we don't design it that way, it's already against GDPR. So if you think about, okay, I already mentioned them, Facebook or Google. Google just got a nice fine. Nice for them because it's small for them. It's 50 million euro. It's just like a conversation starter with a regulator. They got this fine for designing their service in a wrong way. Because if you, probably you don't do it often, but we do it for experiments. If you buy a new phone and you download Android, it will first talk to you with this language, please accept, please consent to everything, and then you can maybe control something, yes? So first you download everything together with a lot of data sharing built in the system, and later you are allowed to go and change these settings. This is wrong. The system has to be designed in a friendly way, in a privacy-friendly way from the very beginning. That's the second part of this provision. By default, every service, even Google, has to respect the principle of data minimization and the principle of necessity, which in other words means that that thing cannot take from a user more data than is absolutely necessary to function. And only later on, you can have this conversation with users where you ask them, hey, do you want more? Do you want to, I don't know, enrich your profile in order to have better search results or something? And if they buy into this, yes, you can do it. But first, you have to reassure that the service is data. It's not data hungry. It's taking minimum and not maximum. So these are the principles. And I have the feeling that people working with technology, they immediately jump over these principles to very concrete questions or very concrete concerns about technological solutions, like how we anonymize data, how we make data secure. Basically, data security is the first thing that I hear when I talk to developers or software engineers. How do I do it? I mean, it's not a question to me. I don't know. Don't ask me about these things. I just know they exist. So what we are trying to say in conversations like this is take a step back. Like, don't rush. Like, you know these things. You probably know very well how to effectively anonymize something, like make something anonymous, meaning that you cannot revert it, yes? That you cannot bring back identification into a data set. It's not a challenge, really. The challenge is to consider where you need it, why you need it, or why would you need personal data if you can have anonymous data. These are the questions that we have to be asking. So the way we are looking at this in our world, people who I hope understand GDPR, is that it's always a process. It's always a cycle of decisions, of steps that you take while designing a service and then monitoring how this service works, because it's a constant process. It's changing. It has certain life, right? It's not like you design something, you float it, and it's end of work. It's a constant process of evaluation also, how users use it, what data actually is generated, what data we actually need. So we go in a cycle. The responsibility for doing it like this, for not thinking about privacy as a checkbox that lawyers check at the very beginning, but as a managerial process, that's responsibility of the data controller, the big boss, yes? Somebody who has responsibility for the whole thing, for the whole service. But in practice, you will also be involved in this process, and you have to be aware that it's a constant process that will be taking your time, will be taking your attention, because without it, it's worth nothing. Bringing it to a very concrete questions that I believe every person designing technology should have in mind. I have this short list that translates legal principles into human language. And I encourage you to look at it and to really reflect on it. It might sound very intuitive, but if you reflect on this and start applying it to concrete cases, you might also have many questions, yes? What it means, do not collect data just in case, when we talk about machine learning, all those fancy algorithms that are supposed to learn something. We are tempted to create databases out of everything we have, right? I hear this argument all the time from business. We don't know yet what might be useful in the future. How can I know whether my excellent algorithm will not learn better on something more if I add, I don't know, data about how people walk or how they smile? Let's do it. Well, that's obvious clash with data protection philosophy. You can do a lot if you are able to anonymize data, if you are able to work with data that is not linkable to individual. And then you can do all experiments you want. You can create models that nobody else created with all data from Facebook if it's anonymous. But if it's personal, you need a good reason. You need to be able to explain why you take what you take. If you cannot do it, you are in trouble, or clearly define purposes. It's a key. It's an absolute key to understanding data protection law. If you understand why you do certain things, if you can defend that purpose and say, hey, without, I don't know, knowing how somebody walks, I really cannot have this software running because it's about running or running shoes. Yes, it makes sense. But if software is, I don't know, a banking application and it collects location, why would it do it? Even with consent. Even with consent, you cannot do certain things. According to GDPR, if your data is irrelevant for the purpose, even consent does not fix it. Even if consumer says, yes, okay, I'm clicking through, I'm clicking okay everywhere, even this kind of behavior does not really give you a legal basis to collect data that is completely irrelevant, according to the law. I know many applications do it, but that's simply illegal. So defining purposes and understanding them is like double-edged weapon. On one hand, it will make your life complicated because you might discover that many types of data are actually irrelevant or you don't know what purpose they are supposed to serve. On the other hand, it gives you great arguments to say we don't need consent because we know that we really need this data, which means it becomes necessary for the service, and that's a legal basis in itself, and you can collect this without consent. That's the best scenario that we always advocate for. Or a time limit. A very difficult thing. You know, I'm also running a service for people. My organization is running website. We run a newsletter that you are all invited to sign up to. We run many services for people, in fact. We also struggle with this. For how long I really need this? How often I will be looking at my CRM system where I have all these journalists and politicians and strange people like lobbyists who move from one company to another. How often am I supposed to delete people who stopped doing this work, for example? It's really hard. I admit it's really hard, but nobody tells you it has to be 1 month. It can be 5 years, but you need to have this process. And again, it's better to design this process of verifying database in advance rather than discover after 5 years that nobody ever done it and you have to go through the whole bloody thing because then it's impossible. So yes, time limit is important. Respecting people's choices. What do I mean here? I don't just mean the situation in which user says no and you interpret this as yes. That would be too easy. I'm also talking about something like we call dark patterns. The way of designing service or website or application in a way where user falls into traps and says or does things he or she doesn't want, yes? If we look at the most popular services, in my humble opinion, they are designed in order to not convince, in order to trick people into leaking data they don't want to leak. That's not respecting their choices. If I have to go through 10 screens to effectively say no to targeted behavioral advertising done by 500 other companies, and there's only one click, namely closing the window to say yes to all this, this is not respecting my choices. And in Poland, most of the media companies do it that way. Of course, they will end up having fines, probably higher fines than Google because that's really outrageous. It will take time. They will pay for it. But they start with this. They start with disrespect for user choices. And when I ask them why they do so, because we are in constant dialogue, they say, look, we did research, we did surveys, we compared. When we gave people yes, no, you know what happened? Most of them said no. I said, okay, and we don't want it. Aha. So they clearly know why they are doing it, and still they are doing it. That's not respecting users' choices. Being transparent means explaining what happens with data within the service in a way that people can understand this, can understand and can control. That's another aspect of why Google got this little encouraging fine, is because they didn't explain well. They have one privacy policy for the whole empire of services, where average user gets completely lost. And for such a person that reads this first time, it's almost impossible to understand where location goes, where specific metadata are used, why this is happening this way, how Google Drive works in relationship to Gmail and so on. That's not transparent. I appreciate it is difficult, but it's the responsibility of the designer and somebody who benefits financially from a service to do it well. So to put it simple, the more complicated you do the service, the more work you have here. But at the end, it's your choice or your boss's choice, your executive director's choice or board's choice, how complicated that can be, right? If we go into machine learning, black boxes, inferences, crazy predictions, I'm sorry, you have to explain it if it's about personal data, of course. Because if it's about weather or fish or cars, then it's okay. Okay, cars, wait, no, cars no. Cars contain people. it's more complicated. But so it goes with the service that you create, and you have to be responsible till the end. And of course, for me, it's the last point. For you, maybe the first, but I really don't see much problem with data security. On one hand, data will always leak. I cannot think of a single big company that never had data leaked. Probably it's impossible to win this race. There will always be somebody ahead of us, stealing this data or hacking it. Well, I mean, that's the reality we live in. I'm not discouraging you, of course, from working on this point of providing security. But I want to stress it, that's really like the last step. Because if you got everything else wrong, if you collect too much data, if you collect unnecessary data, if you do unfair predictions, if you manipulate users' choices, the fact that you leaked the data or lost, I don't know, pen drive is really the smallest of the problems that I see with GDPR, and probably also not something that will bring you high fines. The highest financial penalties will be about other things, not about losing data, because everybody is losing data all the time and everybody would go bankrupt. So that's at least my prediction, my intelligent prediction as a lawyer, that it won't be a big issue for data protection authorities. So that's the checklist I wanted to bring you. And really, it all goes down to this, to taking this bird's eye view on the user's needs, because you provide services for humans. At the end, there is this person, and the whole GDPR philosophy is based on the premise that we protect value, which is user's choice and user's awareness. If we can deliver on this, if we can actually understand this human being, how it thinks, how it functions, we can defend many things, right? So again, it's like a double-edged weapon. On one hand, it limits things you are able to do with technology. On the other hand, it gives you a lot of freedom, because if you have user on your side, if user likes your service, understands your service, is well-informed, trusts you, feels confident that data is not shared with third parties, and all this, a lot more can be done. And we have research and surveys confirming this. And finally, also think about cost-benefit analysis. Even if you ignore humans, even if you don't like humans, you can also think about money, and you can also think about legal risks. The more data you have, the bigger cost of storing it, securing it, dealing with it, handling it. It's not light, right? You know it better than me. And legal risk, or the risk of dealing with unfriendly customers, clients who want something from you. Maybe it won't be you, maybe it will be your data protection officer, but at the end coming to you and saying, hey, how do I move all this data? Because these days users have right to move their data somewhere else. How do I move it? How do I move all this metadata we store in interoperable format? Wow, or how to even reveal all the metadata that we collected over years so that user can understand this, can control it. These things can get very tricky in practice if you never thought about the data you're actually sharing, in the, storing in the database. So this legal risk and the complications related to the fact that you have to fulfill many users' rights is exponentially increasing with the amount of data you have. So it's really worth to do this calculation. So those are the principles or the questions that I wanted to signal to you, and I'm really happy to discuss it deeper if we have time. Just wanted to advertise to you our website, especially to Polish readers, but if you trust translators, you can also use translators. On that website, we publish a lot of information around GDPR, including practical guides, how to apply it, not for technologists yet, but at the end of this month, on the basis of what we discuss here and what I heard from the organizers preparing for this, this closing keynote, we will also publish material for programmers. So, so GDPR for software engineers or developers will also be on the website, which might be useful in your work. And as I said before, we also have newsletter, but that's mostly for the Polish speakers. And for those of you who live here, there is also important fundraising season starting for us. So if you haven't decided yet where to move your 1% of your tax, remember about that. So that's what I wanted to bring here. I hope it was interesting, and I'm really open for discussion and questions. Thank you.
Indeed, we have time for questions. Any questions? Anyone? There's one.
Hi. I just had a question about, at the beginning you talk about what does Google know about you or something, and I'm worried about the word know in that sense, because what does it mean for Google to know something? Google is not a person, doesn't know things in the way we do. So when you say, if Google can tell me everything it knows about me, I mean, it can give me a list of its history, but the conclusions it draws based on the searches I do, is that knowledge? I mean, can you ask it that? I wonder, I mean, the same as you can even ask a person, what does a person know? Ask a person to tell them everything they know about me. What does that mean? What do you think about that?
Okay, thank you. It's and interpreting what I said. Of course, it's a shortcut, and yes, if we apply this to human, it would be there would be a lot of space for interpretation. Yes, what is knowledge? But in this case, this graph that I was showing, of course, is just data. Yes, it's nothing. This picture that I have in mind, it's example. It's just full of examples of data that we know that are processed. So when I say knowledge of a company that does this, that creates my profile on the basis of what I shared, on the basis of my behavioral analysis, it creates certain knowledge. As I said, by knowledge, I just mean another set of data, nothing more than that. So I don't expect CEO to reveal his or her intuitions to me. I just expect the company like Google to reveal data attributed to me, data that build my profile, in particular my marketing profile. The third layer of interpreted knowledge is just inferred data inferred by means of algorithmic analysis or statistical analysis, comparing me to other users and saying, oh, by the way, we expect she's pregnant, we expect she has this IQ, or we expect she lives in this place, or we expect she likes cats or dislikes diseases. So those data points, the moment this knowledge interpretation becomes data point, it should be revealed to the user. So I just refer to database, nothing more.
We have another one here.
Yeah, so you were talking about the anonymization of data, and if you're actually using anonymous data, then you can do kind of what you want, you said. But is there a gray area between, if you correlate some data that is not necessarily personally identifiable, but still you know that there are 2 or 3 data points that come from the same source? Is there like a gray area here, or is it clear?
That's more my question to you, I think, because that's really a technological challenge, not a legal one. For lawyers, it's quite simple. Either you can link data to identifiable person. Of course, identifiable does not mean that we need to have surname of this person. For example, the kind of identification that happens in advertising world, where you have a cookie linked to advertising ID. Yes, advertising ID for many businesses means nothing. What means advertising ID? For me, it means everything. Advertising ID is linked to a person, which can be singled out. That's an important term for lawyers, single out. So say singling out means I'm able to say that it's this person and not another person. End of the story. So, if I can do it, if I can link data to a person that can be singled out, it's personal data. If I cannot do it, it's anonymous.
So correlating like walking speed and a certain height, that would be fine. And say this is the same data source, but it's...
As abstract features, yes. Yeah. You can say in a certain data set of, I don't know, you could even say in a certain data set of 1,000 individuals, we discovered the following correlations. walking speed with eye color or eye color with IQ, as long as it's abstract feature, the feature is abstracted from specific individual, yes, you can do whatever you like in this model. But if you have one source, obviously not, yes? If it's about one user, then it becomes, or a very specific user, or the correlation, okay, fingerprint, browsing fingerprint, identifiable or not? A very tricky question. With EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, I think a year ago, we published a piece on fingerprinting. I encourage you to take a look at this if you are interested in this area. I can also share a link on Twitter to some stuff I'm talking about. Also, these graphs I was showing, I can post link later on with Lambda hashtag, so you can take a look. This piece we published with EFF on fingerprinting was a real challenge because fingerprint can be unique and can be completely common. What do you do with this, right?
Thank you.
We're an audience of developers and we have different applications that we build. And the first slide where you show like the observed features, the truth is that all those features are the core business model of certain companies. And saying you should know better is not going to change someone's mind when they're profiting so much from that information. For the rest of us, I think that the culture is to do what's kind of best practice. And where is the source of best practice implementation for developers? What is the anonymous approach that's kind of baked into our libraries that we use, not like guidance from who are the developers who are in these organizations, and who do I look for the implementation solutions?
Are you asking about specific examples of like friendly services as benchmark? Do I get it right? Or
yeah, basically. So like you were talking about how these Polish lawyers are used to like looking in the index and saying this is the solution.
yeah.
And that's exactly how developers work.
No, we will not have this index because that index would be a killer, I think, for your work. We just spent 2 months lobbying government together with banks to improve GDPR implementation in the banking law, where the biggest issue for banks was not to have a checklist, closed checklist of things they can do for scoring. Because the moment there is a closed checklist, for them it's end of competition, end of fun, end of maybe not creativity because they are not supposed to be creative, but the end of flexibility. Same for services. I mean, you know, applications can be for whatever thing. Yes, if I have a mental health related app or walking related app, it's a very different observations will be made by this app than if it's a banking app or I don't know, a calendar, right? So there won't be a checklist ever, I hope, because it would be ridiculous to expect that there is this Bible for you. This Bible is those, that therefore I was talking about the principles, yes? And like basically these kind of questions have to be asked over and over again. I know it's not fun to struggle with them every time, but hopefully you don't design new service every day. It's something that has a life and life cycle. There are more people involved than just developers, so you have also support of other people thinking about this. But the only checklist is principles here. If you're the purpose thing, yes, if you're able to prove that your app really needs to observe how I type because it's essential for another feature, please take it. But if you are just interested in the way I type because you believe that on the basis of how I type, my mental profile, psychological profile can be inferred, and that profile you will use for advertising, oops, we went too far. Yes, so it really depends. So the answer will always be depends. And in a way, it's a dialogue. Nobody will punish you for taking certain behavioral observation or certain inferred data because it's in the black list of data you cannot take. There's no such thing. You can take everything and nothing in a way, yes?
I think it's worth rethinking that idea that people must apply judgment, because so much of our work is just putting glue on different pieces that other people have made. So if my job is to think about every, you know, I'm building a house and I have a wall and I'm like, maybe I should take this wall apart before I put it up. I'm just not going to do it. And I would love to actually use the best tools. You know, if I'm going to create a login dialog and I'm going to collect a user information there, most of the time I'm not going to make a new solution for each of those. And the truth is, if you fix the pieces that we glue together, then privacy comes with that. So
I'm not encouraging that the individual developer in his or her room sits and does this checklist. Obviously, this is a managerial process, right, for the whole team working together. But I think you, developers, engineers, are crucial in this process. It's more my point that you should be part of this conversation, because if you are out of this conversation, if you don't understand why an app you are building collects fingerprints, you will not be able to apply any judgment, right? But if you are part of this managerial process, answering these questions, then I think things can work better.
So to the aspect of data security, you said that that fines for data breaches are not going to be that high because they happen so often that all the businesses would go bankrupt. Can you say a few words how you got to the conclusion that it's not going to happen? Because I actually would hope that specifically for data breaches, those fines would go up so that security goes high on the priority list of application developing businesses.
Well, don't quote me on this, please. I mean, it's just my intuition that it won't be the first thing at which data protection authorities will look at when looking for targets for important decisions and high fines, mostly because it's such an obvious thing. Yes, like data leak, and it's very difficult to prevent leaks 100%. So yes, if you have a company that leaks data carelessly, where data leaks because nobody secured them, then certainly, yes, somebody will come and say, oh, this is it's so easy to spot. It's such an easy case for the authorities. Yes, they will come and say, okay, fine, punishment, because we cannot ignore it. But if a company applies security, which is always should be proportionate to the stakes, so the more sophisticated, the more sensitive data, the bigger volume, the more granular data you have, the more of all these measures have to come in place. If you did all this, and even though something happened, something really unexpected happened, I don't think these type of cases, I think, won't be first to punish, because everybody struggles with this. It's like basically a race of weapons, yes? So that's what I wanted to say. Not that carelessness will be ignored, not at all, but if you make an effort to do it and you still fail, like many others fail, I don't think this is going to be major disaster in legal terms. Maybe it will be major disaster in terms of reputation, because under GDPR, you also have to inform users, notify them if you had a breach. Companies do it. I get a lot of these notifications, and some of them are really well done, like really clear, with precautions, with immediate steps taken, really good communication with people. So it also can be managed, yes, this kind of risk. But of course, it's not nice to send notification like this every week to your users because you keep losing data. So even without a fine, it will backlash. But it was just my point that compared to other challenges, I think security challenge is maybe less controversial, maybe easier to manage, and maybe more kind of like it's tolerated better by authorities than things like collecting data just in case or storing them forever.
One more here. Okay.
So I have a question from a user perspective. How can I check or ensure that some company or some application that I started using does not collect more data, or this completely unrelated data in other way than getting a data leak in the next few years, where my surname will be with all the data that was gathered there?
Theoretically, to GDPR, you simply have a right to ask. You have all you need to do is to send one email or click the button, if there is one, should be on the website, to check it. please give me a copy of all my data. In theory, the company should respond with a huge file full of your metadata, behavioral observations, if it makes them, and connects to you as a person. Because if it made them and disconnected from you, then not. Coming back to the anonymity question, yes? But if it keeps collecting, storing observations on you, it should respond with everything. But in practice, not many companies do so. Most of them will only show you this top of the iceberg. And that's the legal battle that we are having right now. There are many complaints about this. There are many legal cases coming up trying to define it. Yes, trying to force companies to really do it. So I think it's going to take like 5 more years for this law to be fully operational. But according to the law, you just ask and they tell you.
We have time for one more question here.
I think I saw questions here.
Here is a question here.
Hi. So first of all, thanks for this talk. I think it's very important. And yeah, as you say, all of us can benefit from that because we are all clients and users of services. And yeah, my question is simple. Like, if we notice a problem with one of these principles, what can we do? Are we obliged to sue the company ourselves, or are there some state organizations, or should we talk to you about it?
You mean as users or as developers in the company that has this problem?
Oh, maybe both,
Maybe both.
scenarios.
Well, so if I was part of a company doing this wrong, I would think it is in my best interest, yes, what I said about this, like these risks, they backlash, they cause problems, they also backlash to developers because you might be asked to develop a special service responding to crazy data requests, yes? So the moment company realizes, oh my God, we have obligation to reveal everything to the user, that also becomes a problem for people working in the company. I know companies that kind of love and hate us because we ask these questions and some people inside were asked to prepare this huge file. And we heard from them, you know, it was crazy number of hours of work, but it was so interesting to do it. So depends what you like. If you like solving difficult problems, sit and wait, they will come. But if you are worried about your salary or reputation of the company you work for, it's better to talk to the management about problems you identify. And they should be wise enough to listen to you. If you are a user, the easiest way, don't talk to us because we are a very small shop. We have 7 people, not all of them even working on Substance. So for us, it's impossible to deal with humans coming with problems. But there is a special body called Data Protection Authority in the law. In Poland, it's called UODO, Urząd Ochrony Danych Osobowych, formerly GIODO. It's same thing. And that thing has staff, like 200 people, half of which is busy with complaints. It will take time because they are buried with those complaints. They have really a lot of work, but they have the power to go and check, punish, impose fine, explain. You can also talk directly to the thing that is doing wrong. And if you have some competence, like legal competence or IT knowledge or something that can impress them, it can be effective. You can also win a lot by entering into dialogue, saying like, where is my data? Do you want me to complain? If not, please. So you can also try direct contact. Every company now, almost every, from the big ones, all of them have people called data protection officer. It's a new job, good job, because it's usually quite well paid and it's independent. It's even independent from management. So these people are kind of like agents of users inside of companies. So you can identify such an agent and talk to this person who usually has high interest in preventing punishments and complaints. So it could work.
Thanks.
I would not want to put a full stop here, but I need to put a comma. So Katarzyna will stay with us a little bit longer. If anyone would like to continue this discussion, just please gather here. But at this moment, let's thank her for this initial 1 hour of discussion, and let's continue here downstairs. Thank you.
Thank you.